Hello and thank you for joining me for another episode of Massalia Tales. On the last episode, we attacked the Volcae clan near their capital of Tolosa, doing battle against their entire force, which was mostly garrison units. It was a fairly standard battle. Our superior line infantry managed to win with the help of our cavalry advantage, destroying the enemy missile units, meaning that we managed to take the Volcae homelands of Tolosa with relatively few losses and have occupied the lands for ourselves. However, our new neighbours didn't seem too friendly, so in many ways we've just acquired ourselves some new potential enemies. We'll see how that goes. Let's continue. The assimilation of the Volcae brought a new sense of safety to Massalia's paranoid citizens. But wiser minds could see that in the grand scheme of things, they were in more danger than ever. Large warbands were marching in Cisalpine Gaul. The Iberian tribes were putting aside their differences to fight with the major powers, and to the north, an aggressive family of Gaulish nobles was consolidating a massive kingdom with strength far greater than the host of Zenon could ever muster. It was a moment of peace in the building state of total war. For Zenon and the council, it was just a matter of time before destruction threatened once again. Here is Zenon's army in Tolosa, currently regenerating troops. Being inside the city increases his rate of regeneration, so by next turn his army will be in a much better state than it is now, having fought a couple of battles and being slightly out of shape at the moment. Another option to get him back into a state fit for fighting is to recruit new units, but as you can see, I'm having a little bit of a financial crisis at the moment, so I can't really afford anything like that. You can also see that garrisoning troops in the city is becoming too much of a burden on public order for me to continue it for any more than one turn. I moved Zenon's forces out. The public order penalty was still there. This is because Gelon's forces are hanging around in Massalia as well, so I had to pull those guys out, and now things have stabilized. Public order is going to begin to increase. Good news. I need to decide where to put these forces to best defend against any potential attacks. I'm going to put Gelon on the road heading north, because that is the road along which the Helvetii will likely invade. Of course, if the Unsuberas decide to invade, they'll come from the east. For Zenon's force, I could stay around and defend Tolosa, but I was more worried about a sudden attack on Massalia happening and having to get back there in a hurry. So I positioned him on the crossroads between Tolosa and Massalia, meaning he can defend against attacks potentially from the west, south, and from the north and east over in Massalia if he can get over there in just one turn, and Gelon can hold until Zenon arrives. I also now have enough money to start converting Tolosa into a Hellenic town, which will increase the amount of garrison units there and make it generally more safe. Moving on, I decided to try and alleviate the financial situation by reducing the size of Zenon's army, since I wasn't using it and it seemed like there was a lull in the fighting which would give me the opportunity to do that. I'm also going to increase my tax level, because now that I control another province, more of my income is coming from taxes, so that's going to make a more substantial difference. And right now I do need the money, so we're going to have to bring things back up to normal. In the next turn, I noticed the tribe to the north of me had been destroyed by the Arverni. The Arverni are gradually building a pretty powerful looking faction to the north of us, and if they wanted, they could attack. They've refused non-aggression several times, so it's definitely not out of the question. Now, if Yanasa is moving into the mountains, into the Alps, to scout out the Helvetii lands, I wanted to see what was going on there. They have nothing in their home base. I wondered if they had moved south to attack their neighbouring tribes, so I'm going to check that out next. Before we can reach winter though, the Cessetani, an Iberian tribe to our south, decide to declare war on us. Not really the news I wanted. This means that Zenon is going to have to focus on defending against attacks from the south, and potentially leave Massalia itself vulnerable to attacks from the northern and eastern tribes. There are the Helvetii. They show up. They've been damaged in fighting by the looks of it. I believe they must be warring with some of their northern or eastern neighbours, which is probably why they haven't been bothering me, so at least it's good to know. Hopefully that situation will continue. Bad news for Tolosa, a plague has struck the town. This severely reduces the growth of the province, reduces the amount of money we're going to be making, and causes a penalty to public order. Luckily, none of these problems were particularly large, so it wasn't a big deal. We can deal with this disease for now. We'll just have to wait it out, and I'm not going to send any troops there for the meantime in case they get infected with this plague. What I do need to do is move Zenon away from his current position, sitting on a bridge near Massalia, a more conservative position than I had him in earlier, to go and occupy the lands in South Tolosa. This is because the Cessetani could attack at any time. I have no intelligence whatsoever on their situation. I don't know whether their troops are down in southern Iberia or if they're right on the border. So, to be safe, we're going to occupy the approaches towards Tolosa and Massalia right away, making sure my zone of control doesn't allow them to move through. Next, the Sequani, a tribe to the north who are in defensive alliance with the Helvetii, decide to declare war on me. Potentially not something that's going to have any near future consequences, so I wasn't going to do anything to bring more forces back towards Massalia to deal with that. I'm just going to pretend that that didn't happen, essentially. Now going forward, the Cessetani do something. They move forces over the border, and if you looked very closely, you would have seen that actually they moved a lot of forces, but all I noticed was this little stack of 7 units, and I decided I'm going to wipe them out before they reinforce, but they had already reinforced. In fact, that stack was a reinforcement group for their main army, which was waiting in ambush. Very inconvenient indeed. Zenon is in trouble. An unknown army, which is approximately twice his size, is now attacking him. The balance bar says we're in trouble, but of course we don't know what the enemy have or how they're going to go about this ambush, so there's still some hope that we can fight through and survive. Let's head down to the battlefield and see what we can do.
In this treacherous world, there has always been at least one truth, my friends. There is no end to the greed of Greeks. They are not content to their homelands and now seek free peoples to enslave and free minds to corrupt with their womanly ways. Perhaps the Gauls like this idea, but Iberians cannot sink so low. Hear this, my brave warriors. Today there shall be no rest until Greek blood forms a river that flows for 1,000 years. To every man who returns to me with the head of a cursed Greek, I shall grant a herd of fine cattle. And to the man who returns with the head of Zenon, there should be land enough for 1,000 families.
So Zenon's forces were on the march when suddenly the Cessetani army appears from 2 sides of the road. Now unfortunately for the Cessetani, they've picked a strange formation. They've put all of their melee units coming in from the east with their weaker units on their left flank. Whereas on the other side, they've got pretty much only slingers. Now this formation was very exploitable for me because I have a cavalry advantage. I can send my medium cav to go right for the slingers and drive them away, thus saving the backs of my main line from being attacked by them whilst they turn to face the enemy's main advance. You can see I dodged their general with my inferior cav and got their general caught up by my hoplites, which is excellent. The rest of the line is now engaging. The enemy mostly have light to medium spears, so my hoplite line, which is formed up in a phalanx, should be able to hold them. Here on the end I have my lighter levied troops, but they are only fighting with these armed townsfolk who are even worse, so my guys should be able to win out here. Overall, we formed a pretty standard battle line here, so the enemy hasn't really exploited their ambushing approach to come out with some sort of formation that will really harm me. So I'm willing to just let that fight go on. Overall, my phalanx should hold out okay. Meanwhile, the enemy's missile units are in trouble. I'm also kiting off a few of their sword arm units away from Zenon, because Zenon is taking the brunt of the enemy attack. He actually was attacked in his flank, because the enemy attacked the front of the column where he was marching and the side, and he's actually taken moderate losses. Zenon is going to lose about 1/3 of his men in this engagement. Luckily, Zenon himself is somewhere in the mix fighting on and has not been harmed, at least hasn't been harmed yet. This is the area where the enemy's strongest troops are positioned too, including their higher level spearmen and some of their sword warriors who are actually quite powerful. And as you can see, they've broken up my phalanx quite well, so my men are for the most part fighting one-on-one actually in that part of the battlefield. The enemy's general, who has taken a few casualties, is withdrawing from fighting with my spearmen, a good idea from him. Up on the other side of the battle, my cavalry have gone around to take out some more slingers who I spotted coming over the hill. Meanwhile, some of these enemy townsfolk aren't too happy about having to fight with my own swordsmen here, and they're starting to break. You can see a big pile of enemy bodies has appeared in front of where my line is. The enemy are taking casualties, and I'm not really going to be losing anyone there. At the back of the column, the enemy are beginning to retreat as well. My Gallic levies are slowly pushing away these low-level enemy troops, meaning that these levies can start to fold around and help some of my guys in the center. At this point, the enemy's ambush is starting to falter. Too many of their units are falling back from the main fight. and overall, things are actually going really well for me. Now eventually I got my cavalry back down from the hill to attack the enemy's centre from behind, which broke many of their best warriors, meaning my men could chase them down, kill a bunch of them, and of course form up again to receive any new enemies coming towards them, including these guys who I did kite off and are now coming into the fight from the north. Many of these retreating enemy troops are going to be run down by these cavalry. I'm not going to let them retreat and form a new army ready to attack me next turn. I want to exploit the advantage I have here in this battle and win out as much as I can. Pretty much rout as much of the enemy army as I can. Even though this is an ambush, I should be fighting to survive. Things are going so well, it's turning into a battle where I want to wipe the enemy out so that they can't attack us next turn. So the enemies fighting Zenon are now falling back. Zenon's going to kill a bunch of them, but I'm not going to chase those guys for now. I am going to prioritise trying to get into a new formation. As I do so, I am going to be running through a bunch of the enemy's retreating units. You can see here, I'm trying to get my guys to form up. All these enemy routing soldiers messing with my formation and are slowly being slaughtered by my troops as they try and arrange themselves into a formation to receive the enemy's reinforcement army, because of course you'll remember the enemy did have a second army, which was the army I originally thought I'd be fighting. I have no idea where it is. It hasn't appeared anywhere on the minimap yet so far on the battle, so I've just formed up on top of this hill facing south, assuming they'll come from the south because they were southerly on the campaign map, and I'm going to wait to see what happens. The battle line I'm forming is pretty standard. I've got all of my spearmen in front with the slingers behind. Spreading slingers in front would perhaps be more traditional, but in this case I wanted a nice conservative formation. Plus being on top of the hill means I have very poor line of sight, as do the enemy coming towards me. So if there is a skirmishing battle, it will be held at very close range. So it's a good idea to have my spearmen in front so I can very quickly close the difference and end any skirmish that isn't going my way. I sent my cavalry forward to look for the enemy, and I found them immediately. They were just coming up the hill. You can see they're leading with some slingers who are now going to fire at my cavalry. I'm going to pull the cavalry back. At least I now know where the enemy are. The problem is pulling these cavalry back, means I lose my line of sight on these enemies, so I can't fight with them for now. But what eventually happened is the enemy moved all of their units up into a big blob. I got my slingers to start firing at them because they are well within range. But this big blob of enemy troops means their own slingers are kind of protected because the warriors with shields are holding them up and deflecting all of the stones coming in, whereas somewhere in the gaps a few enemy slingers are firing out. I believe they're firing at my hoplite lines, who are so well shielded themselves the enemy won't really be getting any kills on me. But I realised this isn't really going to be a productive use of my time to just fire into this blob of shielded enemies, so I started moving forwards, and just as I did, the enemy decided to charge forwards as well. And they're charging entirely towards the right hand side of my centre, meaning my left side is completely free and I'm going to be able to outflank them very soon. The enemy rush in, start bombarding my lines with jabs. My hoplites form a phalanx to receive them. I'm a little bit too late into my formation actually. The enemy does get in whilst I'm still a bit messy, but overall it looks okay. The enemy are locked in position, fighting with my spearmen, and because they've committed all of their melee troops into that part of the battle line, I can now easily surround them. I've got cavalry ready to come around on my right. On my left I have my own spearmen who are starting to just purely outflank their line as my own cavalry move forwards. The enemy still do have a lot of troops, but they're not really using them very well, pushing them all onto one part of the battle line, which means most of them aren't actually engaged. Meanwhile, their slingers are being bombarded by my own slingers. Now they're not protected by the rest of their men, they're taking extreme casualties and are starting to fall back, because I simply have more slingers who are more experienced than they are. My levies are coming around to the left flank of the enemy here, whilst my cavalry finish off some of those slingers. Actually, some spearmen as well there are being attacked by my cavalry, but it's not too bad. The enemy's spearmen are so low in morale at this time that even attacking them with cavalry is enough to break them. With the slingers gotten rid of, my cavalry can now come and attack the huge blob of enemy troops engaging my main line. This causes a chain rout as the engagement begins, but it's already too late for the enemy. They're routing just as my levies come in to meet them, which means they're essentially routing right into a slaughter, running away from one battle line to find a next. And my cavalry in there as well, basically creating a huge and confusing looking melee in which the enemy troops are being very rapidly depleted. My own hoplites are going to go in to join the fight as well, just to make sure they can't route back out the other direction. The enemy's troops are now in a little bit of a pickle. There's almost no chance of the majority of them escaping this huge blob. So my objective of destroying as much of the enemy army as possible has pretty much come to fruition. Things went quite well. A heroic victory for Zenon's forces. Ambush or no ambush, we have completely eradicated the Cessetani threat. For now, I didn't even expect to be doing that in this battle, so things actually went better than I could have hoped for, even though that was a really dangerous situation on the campaign map. Excellent stuff. Let's head back and see the results. Honourable Sirs, news from Tolosa. The Cessetani ambushed Strategos Zenon's forces. I knew Zenon was worthless. His loss is without meaning, but without those soldiers, what are we to do when the unwashed attack from the north? His carelessness shall be scorned throughout all of our remaining history. No, sir. The Zenon persuaded the men to fight and has destroyed the enemy with minimal losses. This is joyous news. Oh, yes. Joyous indeed. You are dismissed. Do the gods mock me with these false hopes? So with the battle won, the Cessetani forces are in trouble. This heroic victory cost only a couple of hundred Massalian lives, destroying almost 3,000 enemy troops. We can see now that much of the enemy army was just slingers and armed townsfolk. So even though it seemed like a dangerous situation, their army simply wasn't powerful enough to stage an ambush against our army, which features many heavy infantry and quite powerful cavalry units. So this means the area is pretty much secured. We've got nearly 1,000 captives who I'm simply going to release. I have no particular use for these captives, and I believe earning some respect from the Cessetani may be a route towards getting peace. I'm not interested in invading their territory at this stage because their town is really far away. It'd actually be quite difficult for me to invade them, unfortunately. So the Cessetani now have no visible forces nearby us. Zenon's force is still in very good shape, and it's going to regenerate troops, meaning that after a turn or two it'll be back into pretty much perfect condition. I was wondering whether I should pull it back towards Massalia, because with the defeat of that army it seems unlikely to me that the Cessetani will stage another attack in the near future. So I thought maybe I don't need to defend this area, and the main way to work that out is to see whether the Cessetani will accept peace. Now actually, they won't accept peace, and they really hate me, and releasing 1,000 of their troops has only very slightly increased their respect for me. Now this means that the Cessetani must have something up their sleeve, because they would accept peace if they've just lost the majority of their army. The fact that they don't suggests to me they must have tons of forces left somewhere, so I didn't want to withdraw too far. I'm going to move back just a little bit, still making sure my zone of control doesn't allow any Cessetani armies that appear to bypass me and attack Tolosa, which they may not even be able to do due to movement points anyway, but just to be safe, I'm making sure they can't. In the next turn we get a message saying that the Rieti, a tribe in the mountains, has joined our enemies. I believe they've joined up with the Helveti, who they're allied to. We can see them here. They're to the east of the Helveti, which means they're less likely to attack than the Helveti are, and of course the Helveti still haven't attacked. So it seems an alliance between the Sequani, the Helveti, and the Rieti is against me now, and the Insubres seem like they're going to join it. They already hate me. They're not actually allied to any of those factions, but it seems like they could do. Overall, to me, the threat from the north and the east is growing every turn, and I'm quite worried that Massalia, which is relatively unguarded, could be suddenly attacked, especially by the Insubres, who can reach in one turn from Genua. So in response to that, I'm going to move Zenon back into reinforcement range of the city itself, just in case he's needed there, but also allow him to come back westward if he does need to do that. We'll see what he does need to do next time on Massalia Tales. News of their army's defeat shocked the Cessetani people, who previously had held the Greeks in contempt. The crushing loss of their force left a sense of failure that could only be removed by the Iberian tradition of revenge. Massalian envoys arrived to offer peace even before the scattered survivors of the battle arrived home, convincing the Cessetani elites that the Massalians were in a dire situation at home. Hoping to one day exploit this, they refused even a white peace and began preparing both more troops and a powerful bond with the Celt-Iberian Confederation, a tribal alliance that dominated the Iberian Peninsula.